Welcome, everyone, to the Westin MCAT podcast. We are your hosts. I am Azaii.
And I am Phil Hawkins. It's good to have you guys back with us. So today we're going to talk about a topic because we know a lot of students, at least I talk to a lot of students on kind of a daily basis that are approaching their test day. And a lot of them are starting to freak out. Like, what do I do the week of the test? What do I do the day of the test? What can I do to, make sure that I'm in the best position I can? And how should things change as we approach test day? And I really do believe things should be changing. That last week should be completely unlike any other week that you are doing as you're approaching this, getting close to that test day. Azaii, what do you think about that? Would you agree?
Absolutely. Just because you've been, setting up your schedule one way for the last couple weeks, months, etc., doesn't mean that it needs or should stay that way. Absolutely. The week of the exam, the night before the exam, the morning of the exam, depending on when you're taking it, right, should be very different. And I think that it's something that a lot of students stress about, and you do not want to stress the week of your exam, right? We talked about last time keeping our stress levels low. So we're going to aim to talk about that today and see how we can help guide you so that you can keep those stress levels lower during test week. And I'd love to go ahead and get started with that.
Yeah, there's, to kind of like overall big picture, like if there's one piece of advice I have, it's to take things a little bit easier the week of the test. I know a lot of students, as they approach test day, I've had a lot of students actually personally that I've worked with that as they start to get close to test day, their test scores start to drop. And that is like the worst time for your scores to drop. Like the week before your test, like you take a practice test and your score dropped like 3 points, right? That's when people start to panic and things get worse. But generally it's because students are pushing harder. If your test is a week from today, you're really likely to be pushing harder than if your exam is like 2 months from now. And with that like extra effort, students start to get burnt out and they get a little bit more tired. And they start to make sillier mistakes. I always like to in a way to explain this to students. Like, imagine I woke you up in the middle of the night, like you were like in bed. I grabbed your shoulders and I shook you, and I'm like, "Is lysine an alkaline amino acid?" Like most students would be like, "Yes, Phil, what are you doing here? Get out of my bedroom." But if I like shook you awake and I'm like, "Quick, read this journal article and explain this new technique that uses sound to measure the energy in a chemical bond," right? Like that's going to be way harder because you are tired. You're like not in the zone. You're like in the middle of your like sleep cycle. And it turns out that as you push harder, you start to get kind of burnt out. You start to get a little bit tired and your critical thinking starts to get a little bit worse. And the MCAT has a ton of critical thinking. If it was just detail oriented, then, or if it was just like memorization, like students, like their knowledge doesn't tend to change that much as they get tired, but their critical thinking tends to get worse. And that's why students' scores will drop like the week before the test, because they're just pushing so hard. They're putting in 8 hours a day studying and they just end up getting really burnt. And so that last week of the test, I think is really important to like do less passages, like focus on like the little details, make sure you know your units, your equations, your psych vocab, just review all those little things, but probably don't do an exam like, 3 or 4 days before your exam. Maybe look over some of the questions that you missed in the past and the lessons and things that you'd learned from them. But generally just taking it a little bit easier, making sure that you are in your tip-top form on the day of the test, that you're able to critically think really well, that you're well rested, that you've had, like you've been eating healthy, you've been exercising, you've, maybe even socialized in some way, shape or form, at the Zoom call or something with friends. But I think all of that makes you better able to tackle the stuff on the day of the test. And I think that that's really important. I think students like dramatically underestimate the importance of just being in the zone and thinking clearly and not getting like tripped up on like little detail things because they're burnt out.
Absolutely. And I like that you mentioned eating right and exercising. I think it's something that we take for granted so often. But the last thing you want to do, okay, when was the last time you had like a really high carb, heavy meal, like just, pizza and breadsticks and you name it? And I don't know about you, but after I have those types of meals, I need a nap.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, do I want to need a nap every day before my exam? No, not at all. And so making sure that, you're eating a more balanced meal, making sure that you're getting enough protein, that's something that I don't know, how many of you watching or listening had to do standardized exams in middle school and high school. But I remember that when I was in middle school, I had a teacher and she told me, make sure that you have, and please do not do this if you are allergic to peanuts, but she said, make sure you have peanut butter the morning of the exam. So that way you can get some, protein, you're going to get some carbs and some fat. I was young and I didn't really know, what she was talking about. But now that I'm older, I'm like, yeah, protein is going to keep me fuller, right? A little bit of fat's going to keep me fuller. I'm not going to have, and I'm someone that loves snacking. Anyone who knows me knows I love snacking. The last thing you want is to, get used to having to snack a lot during the week of the exam and then realize that you can't snack all of the time while you're taking the test. Right.
Yeah.
So making sure that you're eating so that you can stay full, but not swinging so far that you need a nap after you eat.
Yeah. There's some things I kind of want to mimic with that. I do think that it's important to like definitely want to eat right. And if, for a lot of people, that means, like I'm going to go have sushi this week or things like that. That's like I'm not going to like, eat like 50 pounds of steak or something, or just a pile of donuts. But like, don't, like I wouldn't go have sushi for the first time the week of your test. Stick to the stuff that you're somewhat used to, kind of more routine, but definitely try to make it a little bit on the healthier side. To do a brief kind of neuroscience interlude, I do want to take a second and talk about, so thinking burns calories. This is why this is why you're exhausted at the end of the day. Like, like doing like studying and taking exams, you get like really tired. And it's because like neurons firing burns glucose. It burns calories. It takes energy. Your brain is a little bit pickier when it comes to like what energy sources it can run off of. Which is why if you're like low blood sugar, it's really hard to think and you get cranky and that sort of stuff. You can still like walk, you can still lift heavy things because your muscles aren't quite so picky, but your brain is kind of a picky thing. Prefers glucose more than anything else. And so I think that it's important to have like something kind of carbohydrate-y the day of your test. Now, I'm not telling you to like snort sugar and glucose and like pixie sticks and like just like chug a bottle of syrup. I think it's better to have more complex carbs. They're going to be releasing like glucose slowly over time. I personally really like oatmeal. Peanut butter is a good thing. Things that just release will kind of like give you this like steady flow of glucose so that your neurons will actually work and be able to like have the source that they need, because a lot of stuff doesn't get across that blood-brain barrier and neurons are picky. And so we want to make sure that they have the things that they need. And so like for like lunch, I would recommend like a granola bar and a sandwich or, something like that, maybe a bag of chips to go along with it. I wouldn't do just like, eggs and salami and sausage and bacon for breakfast. I'd add in some things that have a little bit of carbs. As good as eggs and bacon are in the morning, I think some carbs would be kind of beneficial. I also, like also in that kind of like the day of the exam thing, I know a lot of students get a little bit the environment is different. You probably weren't taking all of your practice tests in the Pearson Center. If you were, I don't know how you did that, but I'm impressed. But the chairs are a little bit different. The monitors are different than what you're used to. If you're used to taking on a laptop, they're going to be bigger monitors but also like way lower resolution, because like Pearson's goal, like Pearson is a business. And so they don't want to pay for like $1,000 Herman Miller Aeron chairs and like, $400 monitors. And so they have like, just kind of the bare minimum. And I know a lot of students get like headaches and stuff because they're just kind of like not used to those environments. I think there's things you can do to, kind of prepare for that as well. I've been talking too much, Azaii. I'm just like really passionate about these topics.
Yeah. And something else. So what you eat is important. Also what you drink. So some folks forget that they still need to be hydrated during the exam. And I've definitely had a number of headaches in my lifetime. And I've noticed that I tend to get them more when I'm dehydrated.
Mhm.
So the week before the exam, the day of the exam, make sure you're also staying sufficiently hydrated, because the last thing you want is to get a dehydration headache while you're taking that exam. And on the note of the resolution being lower, I know some folks. So if anyone's watching, you can see that I have glasses. If you're listening to us, I have glasses. So it's really easy to also, with these lower resolution monitors, they're larger, right? If you were used to setting on a laptop, it feels fairly different. Making sure that you don't put yourself in a position to have an eye strain, eye headache kind of situation. So making sure that you're looking away from the screen every couple of minutes. Just look off into the distance for 2 seconds. Give your eyes a chance to reset. When you are, looking at the screen, if you find yourself, and this should not be happening on test day, right? You should not be gazing off into the screen and looking at nothing. But if at any point you do find yourself kind of focused on a single spot, that can also cause eye strain. So as you're looking at the screen and you're reading the passage, keeping your eyes moving, looking down at your notes in the science sections, right? Whatever you've written down, your scratch paper. So don't feel like you have to keep your eyes on the screen at the exact spot every single moment, because that's actually going to be counterproductive, and you're more likely to get a headache. Your eyes are more likely to be strained when you're taking the test.
Yeah. Kind of talking about the eye strain and headaches, and I feel like we've touched on headaches a couple of times. I actually really recommend students to take either ibuprofen or like basically Aleve, Advil, or Tylenol, like some form of an NSAID, just as a preventative measure. I personally really like Aleve because it lasts like 12 hours. And so you don't have to worry about taking another one at lunch. And so you just take it before the exam starts, go through the exam. It's just kind of preventative measure to kind of prevent a headache from occurring. You talked about like drinking during the exam, and like obviously hydration is really important, but for me, caffeine is also extremely important. I have a very severe coffee addiction that I've been just feeding, and I've decided like, oh, nope, just going to be addicted to coffee and caffeine. Ever since, working in a hospital and then med school, I just gave up. Nope. I love coffee. And so I knew that I needed caffeine. I also don't really like energy drinks, which is probably puts me outside, a lot of, kids these days. So I just made a bunch of like really, really dark, like black iced tea. And I just like, I drink a lot of iced tea anyway, iced tea and coffee. And so, and just having that in my kind of little locker off to the side, so that when I like took a break or had my lunch, I was able to chug a little bit of iced tea, get my caffeine fix, because I feel like my brain always works better when it's caffeinated. But I also really want to recommend, once again, don't switch things up, right? Like don't like chug like a triple espresso the morning of the exam for the first time ever. Probably not a good idea. But Azaii, I don't know. Are you a caffeine fiend like I am, or?
No, not anymore. Had you asked me a few years ago, I loved coffee. And I think that's because my dad growing up, he would always drink multiple cups of coffee a day, still does. And then, had me drinking coffee from a very young age. I've stopped drinking coffee. I do like tea, but I've mostly stopped drinking that as well. Not really sure why. So if you're like me and you don't drink these on a regular basis, like Phil said, don't suddenly try drinking them the day of the exam. That's something that if you're saying maybe caffeine would be helpful to have on test day, that's something that you might start trialing, a few months out and see how your body responds to it, because people have very different responses to caffeine, right? And same with, new foods, like you mentioned, don't do sushi for the first time the week of your exam. So that last week, you should really be trying to keep things pretty stable. And so we're talking about, the week of the exam. We're also recognizing that some of you listening, you still have more time before your exam. You're not super close to your exam. So start working on those habits that you want to see yourself, using on test week. Start working on them now. It's never too early to start.
Develop a routine.
Yes,
which I think is super important. And like every time you take a practice test, do the same thing. Have the same breakfast, take it at the same time every day. Don't I'm going to do half the exam from my bed and half of it from the couch, and just kind of like in really untest day conditions. I think mimicking test day as much as possible in terms of the timing and what you eat and what you're going to do. Make it so that then the day of your test, it's just a routine. And it's just like, oh, it's just like any other day. I'm just doing it again only it turns out it's the last time.
Mm-hmm. And kind of thinking along the lines of those routines, I think something that students, and I include myself in this when I was studying, don't always do well with is figuring out how they're going to use their break time during test day. I don't know about you, Phil, but I definitely muscled through my break times when I was studying. And that was something that I wish I hadn't done because
Mm-hmm.
I missed out on the opportunity of really cementing my flow for test day. What would you suggest that, we do during
Yeah.
breaks?
First off, take your breaks. You have the option to not take your break. Like that's something that you're allowed to do. I mean, if you want to, I think you can power through the entire exam, but don't do that. That is like you can't just like stay shackled to your desk like in complete like business mode, critically thinking the entire time for like 7 hours. You need to get up and move around. I like got up and went to the bathroom on every break, not because I really needed to go to the bathroom, but because I want to stretch my legs. I want to get a drink of water. I want to just kind of like move around a little bit. And it is a little bit stressful with like the check-in, check-out routine, but that's something that, it's designed for students to be able to get up and move around. And so take advantage of that. I know there's a lot of students that just, I just want the exam to be over. I want the day to be over. And so they they don't take their breaks. And I think that like that almost always comes back to bite students because like it should be more of a like, a long-term sustainable thing. I know we've talked about that a lot. I know I've used the example of a marathon as like prepping for the MCAT. And I think that there's something to that, not just like, kind of like long-term sort of thing, like being able to make it through the exam, like without stressing. I also think that like if you were running a marathon, the hard part of running a marathon is not running the marathon. The hard part of running a marathon is getting in shape to run a marathon. And so that's why like the week of your test should be the easier week. Like if I was running a marathon this weekend, or like let's say tomorrow, I'm not going to go run 10 miles today. I'm going to take today kind of off to make sure tomorrow I'm in like tip top form. It's kind of the same way for prepping for the MCAT. That week before the test, take it easier. Just make sure that you're in tip top form on the day of the actual test, that you've kind of, prepped for that.
Yeah, I have a classmate who, and as you were talking about the marathon, I know there are going to be people that are going to say, the marathon itself is pretty hard. Yes,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
right. It is a lot of that prep that comes beforehand that makes it so much easier for when you do go to do the marathon, right? So like I mentioned, I have a classmate, she was talking about running, and there's some of us that were in the small group that are not runners. And so when she told us, how long it would take her, we're like, whoa, like that's insane. She's like, well, no, I've been running with my family for my entire life. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's not a big deal because that's kind of my baseline. If I want to get better than that, then I have to do a lot more training. But
Right.
I think that a lot of that transfers over to the MCAT as well. You've put in all of this work leading up to test day. So that test day and test week, right, you can take it easier and you can make sure that you are mentally, physically, emotionally prepared for, as possible, as much as possible for this exam. So that's something to keep in mind. And that's why we are pushing to take it easier. And it really is. We've seen a number of students, who over the years who have and have not, have done very varying levels
Mm-hmm.
of taking it easier. And I think at the end of the day, it pans out pretty much. You take it easier, you make sure that you're in, good mental state for the exam, you're going to do better.
Yeah.
And I do want to touch base really quickly on, those breaks. So I love the fact that you mentioned take them
Mm-hmm.
because, like I mentioned, I did not, when I was studying, I did take them on test day. And I've had a lot of students, or, ask me, what am I supposed to do? Like, do I just sit there? Do I get up? What do I do? Right. So as Phil mentioned, there is some check-in, check-out time. And so you want to make sure that you account for that so that by the time you get back to your seat, the timer's not already running for the next section. So you have about a 10-minute break, and then for the shorter breaks, so just tell yourself you only have 8. And that way you have the minute in and the minute to get in, the minute to get out. And that way you don't have to worry about, oh my goodness, is the timer going off, and I'm in the next section. So say that you have 8 minutes and get up, stretch, I had one student who, when they were at home, she would do a lot of like movement and whatnot. I said, go to the bathroom
Yeah.
and get all of your energy out. No one's going to look at you funny if you're in the bathroom shaking your arms everywhere and, just getting all the excess energy out. But if that's what you're used to and that's what you need, do it. Right.
Yeah.
If you're someone that, for you, it's okay, I need to de-stress in this moment because my nerves are, through the roof, then step out of the actual room, right? They have little benches and whatnot where you can sit and where you would also be eating. Take a
Hmm.
moment, sit there and just head to toe. Okay, you know, scrunch my eyebrows, let them go, right? Like scrunch my shoulders, let them go, and kind of do a full body release so that you can de-stress physically. So it looks very different for people, but I think at the end of the day, doing some aspect of, physical movement, physical engagement will be helpful when you're taking these breaks.
Yeah. I had several students that would do push-ups of like on their breaks. They'd go like step outside of the hallway and do like 10 push-ups just to, move around a little bit. And I think that that's really, really important. I did something, not, I didn't do push-ups, but something kind of like this, like during the exam, where like every couple of passages, it was every 2 passages that I finished, I would just like scrunch up my shoulders like up towards my ears and then just hold it for a second and then like take a whack at the next passage, just kind of like stretching around and kind of moving. Because if your back starts to hurt and you get tired, I think a lot of times people don't realize how much like chronic pain or like back being sore, something like, even if you aren't consciously aware of it, it does affect your thinking process. As somebody who's like worked with a lot of people who have, developed or, been treated for chronic pain, like it's amazing seeing like the scores on it, like mental exams, like just like before and after like treatments or like before an accident or after. And like being sore or stressed out or that sort of stuff, it makes a difference, even though it's entirely subconscious. It's things that we're not aware of. And that's why I know a lot of people are probably like rolling their eyes on like, oh, I should eat breakfast, I should like move and go to the bathroom. Like this has a really big effect. The students that I've seen that have done the best have like almost without fail done these sorts of things. They, took it easier the week before the test. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of students that I've worked with that the week before the exam, they're making a bunch of silly mistakes. Like I have a student that I'm working with that like she's brilliant. But we just did a calculation. She's like, for some reason, I thought there were 10 grams in a kilogram. And she's going to score like way in the 520s. And like, she's like really fantastic. But and like she's like a physics major, and I'm like I know that. She's like, I'm just tired. I've been burning the midnight oil. Her exam is in 2 weeks, and so this kind of goes out to her if she's listening. Take it easier. And I think that is like a big thing, and I'll see students' scores drop like 3 or 4 points, especially in the cars and the bio sections, because cars, like in the other, like cars is kind of special because it's all critical thinking. You don't need to know anything in the cars section. Everything is in the passage. It's 100% critical thinking. Then bio also has a lot more data. And by that point, you're like 5 hours into the exam. So a lot of students are making a lot of like silly errors there. And so if your test day is approaching and you like took an exam and your bio and your car score dropped, to like take a second and be like, maybe it's not, I all of a sudden forgot everything about bio. Maybe I'm just like pushing a little bit too hard. And I don't want to tell students not to study the week of the test, because I don't know if that is necessarily what needs to be done. And 2, students wouldn't do that anyway, even if I told them to. But you want to make sure that you're doing stuff that is just less mentally strenuous. Don't sit down and do like 9 full cars passages one after the other. Focus on those smaller things. I know I said it earlier, but I want to like reiterate, like vocab, make sure you know your amino acids, make sure you know like units, equations. I think psych vocab, that's the last week is like a good week to just spend, going through all like a psych outline and just making sure that you're comfortable with all those vocab terms. But those are the biggest things for me. Kind of like that stretching, relaxing. It's also like, I really do believe that like once you get in shape to run a marathon, running the marathon is easy. Like your friend, like it was her norm. And so like going out and doing it wasn't hard because it became normal to her. And I think that that's the way that you want to tackle the MCAT is like the day of the test should just be another day. Once you've gotten to that point, once you've gotten to the day of your test, that's the easy part. Prepping for the exam is way more difficult. Like starting on day one, like if I had to choose between prepping for the exam from scratch or taking a test, I would rather take 30 tests, 30 MCATs than study from scratch because the studying from scratch is the hardest part. So I think it's really important to, take that time, like stretch, move around, eat right, exercise, all that stuff that like obviously makes sense. But I think a lot of times as students approach test day, they feel like if I could just get through like, 80 more questions of the section bank or 80 more like practice questions or 10 more passages, I would be better. And so they end up pushing harder and it ends up hurting them more than helping.
Absolutely. And something also just kind of throwing this into the list of things that you could do the week before your exam. You've probably made study guides or you have, worked on some, shared some with friends, whatever. That's also a good way to just kind of go through the material a little bit less intensely. Something that you don't want to do, don't try and master something that you haven't already mastered. And that's something that I hear a lot from students and it breaks my heart a little bit because, it's, man, I know that if I had more time, I could really understand this topic. And yes, you are able to, and if you have not heard someone tell you this week, you are able to learn the material. You are capable of that. Okay. Small note aside. That's the week of the exam is not the time to try and master something. If you had difficulty mastering up until this point, chances are you're not going to suddenly master it in, a day or two. And so you don't want to focus your time on that because you're going to get stressed out. It's not good use of your time. And you're not going to let you're not going to promote that tip-top shape that we've been talking about. That time could also be spent on, reviewing your amino acids, super high yield, reviewing units, reviewing equations, etc. Now, let's say you get to test day and you see something that you just know that you don't remember, you're absolutely starting to freak out. Do not stop on that question for 10 minutes. That is not the time to try and rack your brain and dig in your brain for any little bit of information you could possibly think about that topic. On test day, I had a question and I knew that I didn't remember that from my studying. I know that I had read it at some point in time. I knew for a fact that I did not remember it. Now, I could have done one of two things. I could have, stayed on that question and said, okay, I'm sure that at some point, I'll remember it. It was, I think, a pseudo-discrete question. And I could have just stayed there, but that would have cost me multiple points on other questions. It's not worth it. I'm going to say that again. It's not worth it. So at that point, if you know that you don't remember the answer to that question, if it's something that is going to take you 4, 5, 6 minutes to answer that question, flag it, move on. It's not, it is not something that you want to spend that time on.
Yeah. Honestly, we'll probably spend like a whole like podcast episode just talking about dealing with timing and how to hit all of that. But I do think it is important for students to understand that you could get a perfect score on the exam and miss questions in every section. And that's a lot of times people find that like astounding, especially when you talk to people who are outside, who haven't taken the MCAT. When you talk to people's parents or friends or things like that, like, wait a minute, you can get a perfect score and still miss questions. This test, that's stupid. It's really easy to get a good score on that exam then. I'm like, no. The reason you can miss questions and still get a perfect score is because the exam is so hard that it's expected for you to miss some questions. So like if a student finished the exam and didn't miss a single question, I honestly would probably assume they were cheating. Like, I don't know how, but like that is so rare. Like people don't even get perfect scores on the exam, like across the board. Like that's not even really a thing because, and you can miss questions and still have that occur. And so I think a lot of students are used to that stuff in undergrad where if I don't know this, then I failed somewhere. And they feel like a failure. And so students get kind of caught up on that one question and they'll spend 8 minutes on that one question. And then as a result, they don't get to the last passage and they miss 7 questions.
Mhm.
And I think that is something worth talking about and kind of understanding like the psychology of what's occurring there. But that idea of, just knowing, being able to like take a deep breath and move on, and knowing when to do that, I think that is a crucial test day skill. Like the ability to kind of do that. Don't be afraid to mark it and move on. And like if you have extra time at the end, come back, spend some time on it. But a lot of the time, if it hasn't jumped to you immediately, then you're missing something. You're missing a piece of information that you don't know that you should know, or you're like something's gone wrong there with that question, and like spending time there forever is not going to help. It's probably only going to hurt in terms of time.
Yeah. And, we've talked about this, take it easier, right?
Mhm.
Making sure that what you are doing test week, right, is along that same line, taking it easier, doing more content and detail review versus, doing a ton of passages. Test day itself, right? Making sure that you're eating well, nothing super new, right?
Yeah.
Some carbs, just keep it, semi-moderate so you don't end up taking a nap during the exam.
Yeah.
Possible, a leave or something ahead of time to make sure you're not getting headaches if you're prone to them, especially making use of those breaks. And then, just kind of wrapping it up. We talked about taking it easy the week of. Take it easy when you're also taking the exam. Be kind to yourself, right? If you
Right.
don't know something, take a deep breath. It will be okay. That one question is not going to make or break the entire exam for you.
And if your exam isn't coming up soon, emulate this on your practice exams. On your practice exams, take like the same strategy so that when test day does roll around, it seems normal to you. Like this is just a normal day. My average Saturday.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you next time.